Welcome back to the channel. This is Growth with Christ. This is the replay of the video that we took on Wednesday or Friday night. We took it on Friday night, and it's called 2S squared. The reason it's called 2S squared is it's called solid stone or sinking sand. The point of our video today is on foundations and how important it is that as a Christian you have your foundation on Christ. And I think that's really important to, have as a Christian, is your foundation in the right place. So the verse that we want to read today is Matthew 7. So we're going to go there. It's found in Matthew 7, 24 through 27. It says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on a rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, and the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash." So one of the first things that I want to notice is Job. And the reason I want to look at this is I believe that Job had a rock solid foundation. And his faith was on Christ, that Christ would provide for him no matter what was going on. He said it himself, "The Lord has given, the Lord can take away." So I wanted to look at Job 2, 9 through 13. And then we'll go over the counterpart with the Pharisees after. So the part I want to look at is his wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." He replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin at what he said. So the important thing to remember is that in this story, Satan had gone before God and asked to tempt and take away from Job because he felt that Job was only faithful due to what God had given him, and that God had given him many possessions and provisions. So God enabled Satan to take everything away. He killed his kids. He took his wife, right? He killed his daughters. And so at this point, his wife's like, "Just curse God and give up and die." And we see that Job had his foundation on the solid rock, being Christ, and that his faith and his relationship with Christ was not affected by anything that came against his foundation. That's part of a good foundation, is the trust that you put in that foundation to keep your house from falling over. So the reason I want to look at Matthew 23, which is the Pharisees, and we'll read this, right? Is we see a warning against hypocrisy. It says, "Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, 'The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach.'" So we see right there, and that's all I'm going to read from Matthew 23, because that's all we need, is that Jesus told them and he warned his people about hypocrisy. Meaning that the Pharisees, they claimed to be on stone, right, on solid stone, but their foundation was really in sinking sand. And the more that they practiced their religion, the more they sank into the sand. The problem with sand is, in this story, it represents all the temptations and things of the world. It's as numerous as the sand, right? It can throw a number of things at you. It can throw lust. It can throw self-righteousness. It can throw a bunch of things that really trap you up as a Christian that you really want to avoid, right? So one of the ways that we can avoid falling into the sand and falling for the schemes of the devil, who's always plotting against you as an enemy of Christ, is we can look at Ephesians 6, 2 through 10, right? It's the armor of God. And the reason that this is important is to build your foundation, right? And I wanted to look at this because this kind of builds your foundation on that rock, right? We see other things in this parable that Jesus says, right? The wind, the waves, things came crashing into his house. All these things in the story represent the trials and tribulations that can come against you in your faith, right? And if you're not prepared for them, then your house might just collapse, right? So something we want to do is fully equip the armor of God and really defend ourselves for when those trials and tribulations come. Because the thing that I love about this parable is it's the water. And in this case, the water has a double meaning. So I want to go over these double meanings real quick, right? Because the rock obviously represents Christ and your foundation in Him and where your faith comes from. So the waves have a double meaning, and here's why. We see God's grace, but we also see trials and tribulations and testings of your foundation. Meaning, the reason I love this is the ocean disappears overnight. If you've ever been to the beach overnight, you'll see the waves go way out, and then when the morning comes, they come back in with the tide. And that's kind of how life works. The Bible describes it as seasons. We have up seasons, and then we have down seasons, where things are just tough, they're really hard, and the waves really beat against your foundation. So we see a lot of the times with the Pharisees, they were built on sand, and they were so caught up in worldly things, such as public prayers and the need for attention, that their foundation gets taken out by the waves. When those waves and those trials and tribulations come, it wipes them out. Christ comes, the Christ that they swore that they were serving, and at that point, they fail to recognize Him, and the whole mission gets thrown off point. Their house collapses because Jesus collapses it, saying that's not why He's come. You're walking the wrong way. He calls them a bunch of hypocrites and brood of vipers. So I would have to imagine that their house is way collapsed and sinking inside the sand at this point. And one thing that they didn't do was build up their foundation, right? The foundation is the very bottom of the house. It's the most important part of the house. We see that Jesus is the cornerstone that we're supposed to build our house on. And in this case, the armor of God can help us. It can help us withstand those trials and tribulations that come against us and beat against our house. What I want to ask you for this week, and I asked this to the rest of the group earlier, was where have you found peace in building your foundation with God? The definition of peace that I'm going to use here in this analogy is very simple. It is coming to terms of acceptance in the situation that comes. You accept the situation as it comes, knowing that you have no power over the situation except that Christ has you in His hand and that Satan cannot take you away from Christ. With a firm foundation, that's kind of what we're wanting to look for, is that reliance upon Christ and that daily building of your foundation in your faith with Christ. We're not called to fight the devil, right? In the Bible, in Mark 4, it says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Meaning, we're called to resist, we're not called to fight back. And the reason this foundation is so important is because if the devil sees a foundation that he can't touch, right? He's not going to try and attack you. That means the only waves that are coming at you and the only winds that are coming at you is stuff from the flesh, right? The flesh is still your biggest enemy at the end of the day. Meaning all the thoughts of lust, all that. It's because it's trying to battle the spirit that lives inside of you. However, the foundation and the armor of God is not only used to repel the devil. It's used to repel your flesh and other characters that might come and try and wreck your house. Meaning that friends who thought they were friends, people who you thought they cared about you, the devil might try to use them because he might not see a way in himself, but then he might see your friendship with a non-believer or somebody who doesn't share the same faith as you, and he might use them to try to wreck your house. So my question for you guys is, do you have the 2S squared? Do you have solid stone or do you have sinking sand? Which one are you standing on?